So I'm here with Joyce Froome, another long-standing member of, I nearly said the community, but the museum's community. And we are going to be talking about Joyce's 5 objects. So to start off, Joyce, you've chosen a bead amulet.
Yes, Simon, I think this is a really intriguing object. It's quite tiny, but when you look closely at it, it's really interesting and beautiful. It belonged to Gerald Gardner and ended up in America, and very kindly someone there bought it and donated it to the museum. And it came with information that said that it's a quartz bead amulet for good luck. But in fact, it probably isn't quartz. It's got a very lovely iridescent quality.
A lustre to it.
Yes, which is often what happens to glass when it becomes extremely old. And it's also got a little spiral scratched into the surface, which you probably would be quite difficult to do with quartz, and which was probably added at a later date and suggests that it was... that was a way of kind of gaining magical ownership of it by putting something of yourself into the bead, which is often quite an important thing with magical objects, that if you acquire a magical object, you have to do something to kind of make it your own.
No, it's a beautiful thing, and it's relatively tiny as well, but it sort of has a distinct character to it.
I think it's possible that it might have been found in some kind of sacred site, like an ancient burial ground. It could have been one of these beads that were grave offerings that people were buried with. And it may well tie in with the idea that people were given magical stones by the fairies, which...
that's nice.
Yes, King James I actually mentions that in his book Demonology. And I suspect that there may be a shamanic element to that, that people were kind of led to a particular place, maybe actually went into a burial mound, or maybe, they were led to find a particular object. And then that gets all tied up with the interesting fairy lore and the connection between fairies and the other world and fairies and witchcraft. Because a lot of people who practice magic believe that they've been given magical power by the fairies. And there's just something about that bead, it's the beauty of the way the light shines through it and the colours in it that gives it that kind of ethereal quality that makes you believe that it might have come from Elfland.
Yes, it's very mesmerising, the whole piece. So your next piece is a fortune-telling teacup. Now, we have quite a few in the collection, don't we? I think there's around 20 odd.
Yes.
And
yes.
Why this particular one?
Well, I just think this one is particularly beautiful, and it has inside the cup the patterns that suggest the answer to the question that you're asking when you're doing the tea leaf reading. It's nice that we built up this collection of fortune-telling cups after the flood. It was one of the good things that came out of the flood, that we lost one of the cups and saucers that we had then, and that then inspired Graham to look for other ones to replace it. And it turns out that you have to be a little bit patient, but there are quite a few of them out there in lots of interesting different designs. I mean, they're all absolutely lovely and very collectible, but it's just this one. I think what appeals to me is the symbols inside the cup are quite unusual.
Yeah, they are. And they were commercially produced, weren't they? Because obviously I remember having my gran had her tea leaves read on a regular, but it would be within just a porcelain cup, and it was the formation of the leaves within the cup after the tea had been tipped out. That were red, but these actually, it's where the tea leaves fall.
Well, some of them are tied in with cartomancy and have playing cards, or else with astrology and have zodiac signs inside. Right. It's not clear with this one whether the symbols inside are just to inspire you because they they're of shapes of different things, like I suppose, obviously a horseshoe for luck, for example. But or whether actually it was if the tea leaves gathered onto that particular symbol, that was what gave it the meaning. It's not actually clear because there aren't instructions. Some of them actually come with little instruction
booklet,
books, but this one doesn't. But it's just really lovely. And the other thing about tea leaf reading is, of course, drinking tea and afternoon tea was such a respectable seeming ritual, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just really nice to remember that actually quite a lot of people did do tea leaf reading, and it was often part of the afternoon tea ritual, and kind of subverting that respectability in a rather amusing way, I think.
Completely. So, Joyce, tell us about your next object.
This is this Mars talisman, which is really just such a very interesting object. It dates from the late 16th century, right at the very heart of the witch hunts. And it's a battlefield talisman that a soldier would have worn to protect him going into battle. And it's built around the square of Mars, which is a magic number square where all the lines and columns and diagonals add up to the same number, together with the names and sigils of spirits associated with Mars.
Right.
And what makes it particularly interesting is that it was based on descriptions in books of magic at the time, like Pietro d'Abano's Heptameron. And it is just a fascinating insight into how people actually used these books of magic to create these objects. And it's just a little square of bronze, but the inscription on it is intricate and just really very interesting.
Yeah.
And the other extraordinary thing about it is that it's a found object. It was found by a metal detectorist. And of course, there is this long tradition in magic that found objects are special because did you find them or did they find you?
Yes. Yeah.
And the really amazing thing about this is that not only did this metal detectorist find this fascinating object, but he recognised it as a magical object, and then he very kindly lent it to the museum. So how magical is that?
No, that's fantastic. And is the text in English or Latin or in?
It's just names.
It's not okay.
So it's the names
So
of the spirits in a standard alphabet.
Yeah.
So it's quite easy to read, although it is. Because it's bronze, it's quite corroded. But you can decipher the names and recognise them as the ones that were recommended for use in books of magic at the time.
Your next piece, in fact, is a handmade charm, the look of it. So it's a cat trench art charm.
Yes, these are really lovely. The museum's collection of trench art charms, very moving. And just so evocative of the way that, again, quite simple kinds of magic could give people courage and hope in very extreme circumstances. So yes, this is a lovely little charm just cut out of, I don't know, an ammunition box or something like that the soldiers in the First World War used to make in the trenches of whatever bits of metal they could find around them, just to remind themselves of the possibility of getting through this situation. Things that kind of draw on the familiar iconography, like lucky cats and hearts and things like that, from the other world, the better world that they had come from before they ended up in this dreadful war. To remind them of home and just remind them that they could get back. They could get back home. And,
I think a lot of those trench art charms that we have, they're so poignant and they carry so much with them. So that's lovely.
And I think, because the little cat made it home, we can hope that the person who made him also made it home safely.
Yeah, that would be nice to think that. Yeah. And your last piece actually is definitely probably one of the most sinister things, or one of the most sinister poppets I think we have. Most people comment on this particular piece, don't they?
Yes, well, she would be a really beautiful handmade doll in all her lovely clothes, if it wasn't for the little stiletto through her face. But she's still really beautiful, and she is a classic example of a poppet which was in retaliation. So the people who made her felt threatened by this woman who had a dark past and was not a very pleasant person from what we can gather from the record. And so it was more to prevent her from harming them. And that's true of an awful lot of image magic, that it is more about self-defence.
And retaliation against somebody who's done them wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
And natural justice, I guess. But also she's kind of quite faded now, and delicate, and somehow she's kind of lost that fear and anger that so many Poppets have surrounding them, and that's kind of like leached away from her somehow, so that she's become this kind of almost like a sort of archetypal form.
Yes.
And I think I think that in a way her beauty is perhaps more evident now than the fear and anger
When it was first created.
They were very specifically aimed at particular situations, these kind of images, and it reminds you of that.
Yes.
That is in the past now, and you're looking at something that has slightly kind of become detached from the past that it was when it was created, I think.
If ever I have to move her, it's like this sort of, she's almost looks like this genteel elderly lady somehow. I have to be very, very careful. But also she's quite fragile anyway, I think. But well, thank you, Joyce. That's thank you very much that's a very interesting selection from the collection. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. It's been a pleasure.